But before we reveal what was inside that sleeping bag, we need to ask the obvious question. Why would two smart teenage girls walk into a freezing lake in the middle of the night? The answer starts with what happened 12 hours before they disappeared. July 15, 2019 had been a perfect summer day at Camp Wildwood. Madison Chen and Taylor Williams spent the morning swimming, the afternoon hiking, and the evening around the campfire with the other campers. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing seemed wrong, or did it? Ashley Morrison, Madison's bunkmate, noticed something strange during dinner that night. Both girls kept checking their phones under the table. Camp rules strictly prohibited phone use during meals, but Madison and Taylor were being unusually secretive about it. When Ashley asked what was so interesting, Taylor quickly put her phone away and said it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, because at 9:30 p.m., both girls made an unusual purchase at the camp store, a single waterproof flashlight and 2 energy bars. The camp store employee remembered the purchase because it was odd. Why would 2 girls who had just eaten a full dinner need energy bars, and why only 1 flashlight between them? That raised another question. Were Madison and Taylor planning to go somewhere together? Somewhere they needed light and food? The camp counselor, Sarah Jenkins, found both girls in their beds during the 10 p.m. check. They were whispering quietly, but Sarah thought nothing of it. Teenage girls at summer camp always had something to talk about. She reminded them about lights out and moved on to the next cabin. But here's what Sarah didn't know. Madison and Taylor weren't planning to sleep that night. According to Ashley, who was pretending to be asleep, both girls waited until the cabin was completely quiet before getting out of their beds. They moved carefully in the darkness, gathering specific items: the new flashlight, the energy bars, and their shared purple sleeping bag. Why those exact items? What were they planning to do? Ashley watched as her cabin mates crept toward the door at exactly 2:45 a.m. She wanted to ask where they were going, but something in their careful movements told her this wasn't a prank. This was something serious, something planned. The girls slipped out of the cabin and walked toward the lake. But here's the strange part. The motion sensor lights along the pathway should have activated as they walked. 3 lights along the route to the lake had mysteriously stopped working that same afternoon. Was this incredible luck? Or had someone planned this route carefully? The only witness to what happened next was the security camera at the boat dock. At 3:17 a.m., it captured Madison and Taylor walking to the end of the dock. They appeared to be talking, though no audio was recorded. Then both girls stepped off the dock and into the water, still holding the purple sleeping bag between them. But this is where the story gets truly bizarre. The water at the dock was 8 feet deep. The temperature was 55 degrees, cold enough to cause immediate shock. Most people would panic, struggle, call for help. So why didn't Madison and Taylor react that way? The security camera recorded for 17 more minutes after the girls entered the water. The lake surface remained perfectly calm. No splashing, no signs of distress, no voices calling for help. Just silence. How is that possible? How do 2 teenagers walk into freezing deep water and not make a sound? When the sun rose 6 hours later, Ashley woke up to find 2 empty beds. The counselors initially thought the girls were early risers, but when breakfast came and went with no sign of Madison and Taylor, panic set in. The call to parents was made at 8:30 a.m. Search teams arrived by 9:15. The security footage was discovered within hours. What it showed changed everything. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't 2 girls who slipped and fell. This was something planned. But planned for what purpose? The massive search operation that followed found nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no signs of the girls anywhere in or around Mirror Lake. It was as if Madison and Taylor had simply vanished into thin air. For 5 years, the case remained a mystery. The security footage was analyzed frame by frame. Expert divers searched every inch of the lake bottom. Psychologists studied the girls' behavior patterns. Nothing provided answers. Until that October morning when Park Ranger Jessica Mills pulled a purple sleeping bag from the water. The sleeping bag that Madison and Taylor had carried into the lake 5 years earlier. The sleeping bag that should have been at the bottom with them. The sleeping bag that somehow survived underwater for 5 years and floated back to the surface. But here's what made Jessica Mills call for backup immediately. The sleeping bag wasn't empty. Something was inside it. Something that would turn this missing persons case into something far more disturbing. What was in that sleeping bag? Why had it taken 5 years to surface? And if the sleeping bag was here, where were Madison and Taylor? The answers would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about that July night. Because what Jessica Mills found inside that waterlogged sleeping bag suggested that Madison Chen and Taylor Williams might never have been in Mirror Lake at all. What Jessica Mills found inside that sleeping bag would haunt her for years to come. But before we reveal that discovery, we need to understand why this case had stumped investigators for so long. Detective Sarah Martinez had been assigned to the Madison and Taylor case from day one. She was a 20-year veteran with the county sheriff's department, and she'd seen her share of missing persons cases. But this one was different. This one made no sense. Why would 2 rational teenage girls walk into a freezing lake in the middle of the night? That was the question that kept Martinez awake at night for 5 years. The first clue came from Madison's phone records. Remember how Ashley had seen both girls checking their phones during dinner? Those records revealed something investigators hadn't expected. Madison had received 17 text messages between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. that night, all from the same number. But here's the strange part. The number didn't belong to anyone at the camp. It didn't belong to any of Madison's known contacts. When investigators traced the number, it led to a prepaid phone purchased with cash 3 days earlier from a gas station 40 miles away. Who was texting Madison? And what were they saying? The phone company provided the message content, and what Detective Martinez read made her blood run cold. The messages weren't from a friend. They weren't from a family member. They were instructions, step-by-step directions for what Madison and Taylor needed to do that night. Meet at the dock at 3:15 a.m. Bring the sleeping bag. Bring food for the journey. Trust me. Journey? What journey? And who was giving these instructions? But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The final message, sent at 9:43 p.m., contained information that chilled investigators to the bone. The lights on the path will be turned off. You'll be safe. I've been watching. Someone had been watching these girls. Someone had disabled those motion sensor lights. Someone had planned every detail of what happened that night. But who? And why? Detective Martinez interviewed every camp employee, every maintenance worker, every person who had access to the campgrounds. No one admitted to sending those messages. No one had seen anything suspicious. The prepaid phone had been purchased by someone paying cash, avoiding all security cameras. It was like dealing with a ghost. Meanwhile, the search for Madison and Taylor continued. Professional dive teams scoured Mirror Lake for weeks. The water was crystal clear, with visibility up to 30 feet in most areas. If the girls had drowned, Their bodies should have been found within days, but they found nothing. Not a single trace. That's when investigators started considering a terrifying possibility. What if Madison and Taylor hadn't drowned? What if someone had lured them to that dock for an entirely different purpose? The security footage was analyzed by FBI experts. Frame by frame, they studied every movement, every gesture, looking for clues. And they found something that changed everything. At exactly 3:19 a.m., 2 minutes after Madison and Taylor entered the water, a small ripple appeared on the lake surface about 50 yards from the dock. Not where the girls had gone in. Not where you'd expect to see movement if they were struggling or swimming, but where you might see movement if a boat was approaching. Could someone have been waiting in the water? Could the girls have been picked up by a boat? The FBI brought in sonar equipment to map the lake bottom. What they discovered was shocking. Mirror Lake wasn't just a simple mountain lake. It had underwater caves, deep channels, and hidden inlets that weren't visible from the surface. Someone familiar with the lake could easily hide a small boat in one of those inlets. Someone could approach the dock underwater using scuba gear. Someone could make 2 teenage girls disappear without leaving a trace. But why? What would motivate someone to orchestrate such an elaborate kidnapping? The answer came from an unexpected source: Taylor Williams's diary. Taylor's parents had given investigators permission to search her room back in Colorado. Hidden under her mattress, they found a diary that Taylor had been keeping for months before camp. The final entries revealed a secret that changed everything. Taylor hadn't just been excited about returning to Camp Wildwood. She'd been terrified, because someone had been contacting her online for weeks before camp started. Someone who claimed to know her from the previous summer. Someone who said they had been watching her and Madison. The diary entries were disturbing. He says he knows where I live. He knows my school schedule. He says if I don't do what he wants, something bad will happen to Madison. Who was he? How had this person gotten Taylor's contact information? And what did he want? The online messages Taylor described weren't found on any of her known social media accounts. This person had contacted her through a gaming platform that Taylor rarely used. A platform where users could communicate privately without their conversations being easily traced. Detective Martinez's blood ran cold as she read Taylor's final diary entry, written the day before she left for camp. I have to protect Madison. I have to do what he says. He promised if we follow his instructions exactly, we'll both be safe. He says it's just for one night. Then everything goes back to normal. One night. The night they walked into Mirror Lake. But nothing had gone back to normal, because Madison and Taylor had never been seen again. Now, 5 years later, Jessica Mills was staring at their sleeping bag, pulled from the same lake where they disappeared. The purple fabric was faded but intact. The zipper still worked. And inside was something that made Jessica immediately call Detective Martinez. It wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't clothing or personal items. It wasn't evidence of what happened to the girls. It was a message. Written on waterproof paper in careful block letters were 3 words that would reopen the investigation and send shockwaves through everyone who had worked the case. We are alive. But if Madison and Taylor were alive, where had they been for 5 years? Who had taken them that night at Mirror Lake? And why were they reaching out now? The message raised more questions than it answered. Was this really from the girls? Had they been held captive all this time? Or was this some cruel hoax designed to torture their families? Detective Martinez knew she needed answers. fast. Because if Madison and Taylor really were alive, every day that passed could be another day of captivity, another day of suffering. But first, she needed to verify that the message was genuine, and that would require going back to the beginning, re-examining every piece of evidence and following a trail that had gone cold 5 years ago. The race to find Madison Chen and Taylor Williams was about to begin all over again. The message, "We are alive," sent shockwaves through the investigation, but Detective Martinez knew she couldn't take it at face value. After 5 years of dead ends, was this really a breakthrough? Or was someone playing a cruel game with the families of 2 missing girls? The first step was handwriting analysis. Martinez rushed the waterproof paper to the FBI crime lab, hoping to compare it with samples of Madison and Taylor's writing from their school records. The results would take 48 hours, but Martinez couldn't wait that long. Why? Because there was something else in that sleeping bag that Jessica Mills hadn't mentioned yet. Hidden in the very bottom of the sleeping bag, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, was a small digital camera. The kind of cheap disposable camera you might buy at a gas station. But this camera had been modified. Someone had wrapped it in waterproof material and sealed it with industrial-grade tape. What was on that camera? And why had someone gone to such lengths to protect it underwater? Martinez carefully extracted the camera and rushed it to the tech lab. The memory card was damaged from years of water exposure, but the technicians thought they might be able to recover some of the data. The process would take time, but if there were photos or videos on that device, they could finally have answers. While waiting for the results, Martinez decided to re-interview everyone connected to the original case. Starting with Ashley Morrison, Madison's bunkmate who had witnessed the girls leaving their cabin that night. Ashley was now 21, a college student studying psychology. She'd never forgotten what she saw that night, and she'd always wondered if she should have done something to stop her friends. When Martinez contacted her, Ashley agreed to meet immediately. But Ashley had something new to share. Something she'd never told investigators 5 years ago. "I was scared they'd think I was crazy," Ashley explained, sitting across from Martinez in a small coffee shop. "But the night Madison and Taylor disappeared, I heard something else. Something I never reported." What had Ashley heard? And why had she kept it secret for 5 years? Around 1 a.m., about 2 hours before the girls left the cabin, I heard voices outside our window. 2 men talking in low whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but one of them kept saying a name. Emma. Emma. There had been no one named Emma at Camp Wildwood that summer. Martinez checked and double-checked the registration records. No campers, no counselors, no staff members named Emma. So who was Emma? And why were 2 men discussing her outside the girls' cabin in the middle of the night? Ashley continued her story. "I thought about looking out the window, but I was scared." The voices sounded serious, almost angry. Then I heard footsteps walking away toward the lake. About 20 minutes later, Madison and Taylor started getting ready to leave. The timeline was chilling. 2 unknown men had been outside the girls' cabin just hours before Madison and Taylor disappeared. Had these men been watching? Had they been coordinating the plan? Martinez felt the case taking on a darker tone. This wasn't just about mysterious text messages anymore. This was about multiple people working together to make 2 teenage girls disappear. But the biggest revelation was still to come. 2 days later, the FBI lab called with results from both the handwriting analysis and the digital camera recovery. What they found would change everything investigators thought they knew about Madison Chen and Taylor Williams. The handwriting analysis confirmed what Martinez had hoped. The message, "We are alive," had been written by Madison Chen. The letter formation, the pressure points, the spacing, it all matched her school writing samples perfectly. But it was the digital camera that provided the real shock. The technicians had managed to recover 17 photos from the damaged memory card. Most were corrupted beyond recognition, but 3 images were clear enough to analyze. And what those photos showed was impossible to believe. They showed Madison and Taylor alive, but not as the 16-year-old girls who had disappeared 5 years ago. These photos showed them as young women, clearly older, sitting in what appeared to be a comfortable living room. But here's what made Martinez's blood run cold. The timestamp on the photos showed they had been taken just 6 weeks ago. Madison and Taylor hadn't just survived whatever happened to them 5 years ago. They had been alive somewhere this entire time, and someone had been taking care of them. But where? The photos showed no identifying landmarks, no windows, no clues about location. Just 2 young women who should have been dead, sitting calmly in an unknown place. Who had taken these photos? Who had been keeping Madison and Taylor for 5 years? And why were they reaching out now? The photos raised terrifying new questions. Were the girls being held against their will? Had they been brainwashed into compliance? Or had they somehow chosen to disappear and stay hidden? Martinez studied the photos carefully. Both girls appeared healthy, well-fed, and properly dressed. They weren't showing obvious signs of abuse or distress, but their eyes told a different story. There was something hollow in their expressions, something that suggested they weren't entirely free. The investigation took on new urgency. If Madison and Taylor really were alive and being held somewhere, every hour could matter. Martinez assembled a task force of federal agents and local law enforcement. They had to find these girls before their captor realized the sleeping bag had been discovered. But finding them wouldn't be easy. The photos provided no location clues. The anonymous text messages from 5 years ago had never been traced. The men Ashley heard outside the cabin remained unidentified. Then Martinez had a breakthrough. She decided to re-examine the gaming platform where Taylor had been contacted before disappearing. Maybe there were digital fingerprints that hadn't been found 5 years ago. The gaming company had updated their security protocols since 2019, and they were now able to provide more detailed information about user accounts. What they found was shocking. The person who had been messaging Taylor wasn't just some random predator. The account had been created by someone with detailed knowledge of Camp Wildwood's layout, schedule, and security systems. Someone who knew exactly when and how to disable those motion sensor lights. But most disturbing of all, the gaming account was still active. Whoever had taken Madison and Taylor was still online, still using the same digital identity. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. This person had been operating in plain sight for 5 years, confident that they'd never be caught. But now they'd made a mistake. They'd allowed the girls to send that message, to place that camera in the sleeping bag. Was this their first mistake? Or was this part of a larger plan? The answers would determine whether Madison Chen and Taylor Williams would finally come home, or whether they'd disappear forever into whatever shadow world they'd been trapped in for the past 5 years. The clock was ticking, and Martinez knew that time was running out. The discovery that the gaming account was still active gave Detective Martinez hope for the first time in 5 years. But it also created a dangerous situation. If they moved too fast, the person holding Madison and Taylor might disappear forever. If they moved too slow, they might miss their only chance to save the girls. Martinez needed a plan that would draw out the captor without putting the girls at risk. But how do you catch someone who's been successfully hiding 2 people for 5 years? The answer came from an unexpected source. Madison's younger brother, David. David Chen was only 11 when his sister disappeared. Now 16, he'd spent years learning everything he could about computers and online gaming, hoping to somehow find Madison himself. When Martinez contacted the Chen family about the new developments, David asked if he could help. At first, Martinez was hesitant. This was an FBI investigation, not a place for a teenager. But David had something the federal agents didn't. He knew his sister's online habits better than anyone. Madison had a specific way of writing when she was scared, David explained to Martinez. She'd use certain words, certain phrases. If she really wrote that message in the sleeping bag, there might be hidden clues that only family would understand. Could Madison have embedded a secret message within those 3 simple words? Martinez brought David to the FBI crime lab to examine the original note. Under magnification, they discovered something that had been missed in the initial analysis. The word alive had been written with slightly more pressure than the other words, and beneath it, barely visible, were tiny marks that looked almost like scratches. David studied the marks carefully. Madison used to do this when we played word games as kids. She'd add little dots and lines to spell out hidden messages. Look, if you connect these marks, they form letters. What did those hidden letters spell? And what was Madison trying to tell them? Working with David's guidance, the FBI analysts mapped out the tiny marks. When connected, they formed a single word. Cabin. Cabin. Madison was trying to tell them she was being held in a cabin. But which cabin? And where? The revelation sent the investigation in a new direction. Instead of looking for a house or apartment in a city, they needed to search for a remote cabin, somewhere isolated enough that 2 kidnapped girls could be held without neighbors noticing. Martinez pulled up property records for the entire county, focusing on remote cabins within a 100-mile radius of Mirror Lake. The list was overwhelming. Over 300 properties that fit the description. But then she remembered something from Ashley's testimony. The 2 men she'd heard outside the cabin had mentioned the name Emma. What if Emma wasn't a person? What if it was a place? A quick search of local maps revealed something interesting. There was a small, unincorporated community about 60 miles from Camp Wildwood called Emma Creek. It was barely more than a collection of hunting cabins and vacation homes scattered through dense forest. Could this be where Madison and Taylor were being held? Martinez assembled a search team and headed for Emma Creek. But she knew they had to be careful. If they started knocking on doors randomly, word might get back to the captor. They needed a more subtle approach. The team set up surveillance on the main road leading into Emma Creek, using unmarked vehicles and drones to monitor traffic. Their plan was simple: watch for any unusual activity, any signs that someone might be holding 2 young women against their will. For 3 days they saw nothing suspicious. Normal residents coming and going, delivery trucks, mail carriers. Nothing that suggested criminal activity. Then, on the 4th day, they got their break. A grocery delivery truck made an unusual stop at a cabin deep in the woods. The driver spent only a few minutes at the property, But the order he delivered was significant. Enough food for 4 adults for several weeks. The cabin was supposed to be empty. It was listed as a seasonal rental with no current bookings. Who was buying groceries for 4 people at an empty vacation cabin? Martinez ran the property records for the cabin. It was owned by a company called Mountain View Investments, which turned out to be a shell corporation with no real business address. The rental bookings were managed through an online platform using false identities. Everything about this property was designed to hide the real owner's identity. The team set up closer surveillance on the cabin. What they observed over the next 24 hours confirmed their suspicions. The windows were covered with heavy curtains that never opened. No one was ever seen outside. But occasionally, shadows moved behind the curtains. More than one person was definitely inside. Martinez faced a crucial decision. They could raid the cabin immediately and hope to catch the captor before he could harm Madison and Taylor. Or they could continue surveillance and try to gather more information about who they were dealing with. The decision was made for her when David Chen called with urgent news. "Detective Martinez, you need to see this. I've been monitoring that gaming account you told me about. The person who contacted Taylor just sent a new message, and it's directed at the investigation." What did the message say? And how did the captor know they were closing in? David read the message over the phone. "I know you found the sleeping bag. I know you're looking for us. If you want to see Madison and Taylor alive, you'll stop the investigation now. This is your only warning." The captor knew about the sleeping bag. Somehow he'd learned that law enforcement was involved. But how? Had there been a leak in the investigation? Or was he monitoring police communications? Martinez realized they were running out of time. The captor was spooked, and spooked kidnappers make dangerous decisions. If they were going to save Madison and Taylor, they had to move now. She authorized the raid on the Emma Creek cabin for that evening. FBI agents, local SWAT teams, and emergency medical personnel all converged on the remote location. After 5 years of searching, they finally had a target. But as the sun set over the forest and the teams prepared to move in, Martinez couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something about this felt too easy. The cabin, the grocery deliveries, the threatening message. It all seemed too convenient, too obvious. What if they were walking into a trap? What if the real location was somewhere else entirely? What if this was just another dead end in a case that had already claimed 5 years of their lives? The answers would come within hours, when the raid team breached that cabin door and discovered what was really waiting for them inside. Would they finally find Madison Chen and Taylor Williams? Or would they discover something far more sinister? Evidence of what happens when 2 teenage girls vanish into the darkness, and the people searching for them can't tell the difference between salvation and a trap. The fate of 2 young women hung in the balance, and time was running out. The raid on the Emma Creek cabin was set for 11 p.m. Detective Martinez felt her heart pounding as SWAT vehicles surrounded the property. After 5 years of searching, they were finally about to get answers. But were they the answers she wanted to hear? At 11:15 p.m., the teams breached the front door. Martinez held her breath, waiting for radio confirmation. "Detective Martinez, you need to get in here. We found them." Found them. Were Madison and Taylor finally safe? Martinez rushed into the cabin, not knowing what to expect. What she discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about this case. Madison Chen and Taylor Williams were there, alive, healthy, sitting calmly at a kitchen table as if they'd been expecting this moment. But they weren't terrified kidnapping victims. They weren't chained or showing signs of abuse. Instead, they looked at the officers with relief and sadness. "We've been waiting for you to find us," Madison said quietly. "We knew this day would come." Waiting? What did she mean they'd been waiting? The man who'd been holding them had vanished into the forest before the raid, but the biggest surprise was yet to come. Taylor spoke first. "Detective Martinez, we need to tell you something. We weren't kidnapped that night. We chose to disappear." Chose to disappear? How could two 16-year-olds choose to abandon their families? The story they told was shocking. The man who'd contacted them wasn't a predator. He was their biological father. "My real name isn't Madison Chen," she explained. "It's Madison Parker. Taylor and I aren't just friends. We're half-sisters. We found each other through DNA testing." The elaborate Mirror Lake plan hadn't been a kidnapping. It had been a reunion between a father and his daughters, designed to look like a disappearance so no one would search for them. But why fake their deaths? Madison's adoption records revealed the truth. Her adoptive parents had custody through fraudulent paperwork. Their biological father, Robert Parker, had been fighting for years to contact his daughters. When legal channels failed, he'd resorted to desperate measures. "He just wanted his daughters back," Taylor said. "The lawyers said there was no way to challenge the adoption after so many years." So Robert Parker created an elaborate plan. The text messages, the disabled lights, the walk into Mirror Lake, all designed to fake the girls' deaths while they escaped to start over. But something went wrong. Over 5 years, Robert became paranoid, convinced law enforcement was closing in. He restricted the girls' freedom and refused to let them contact their families. What started as a reunion had become a prison. "We wanted to come home," Madison said, tears in her eyes. "But he was so scared of jail. He kept saying we needed more time." The sleeping bag with the message had been their cry for help. They'd convinced their father to visit Mirror Lake, claiming they wanted to remember their rebirth. Instead, they planted evidence hoping someone would find it. But this revelation raised difficult questions. Were Madison and Taylor victims or willing participants? Had Robert Parker rescued his daughters or kidnapped them? The answer wasn't simple. The girls had initially chosen to leave, excited about meeting their biological father. But as the years passed, they realized they missed their adoptive families. They wanted to go home. "We thought it would be temporary," Taylor explained. "Just until Dad figured out the legal stuff. We didn't know it would be 5 years. Detective Martinez felt relief that the girls were safe, but sadness about the complex situation. Everyone involved had been trying to protect these girls, but their actions had caused years of pain. Over the following weeks, lawyers would sort out custody rights and fraudulent adoption papers. The girls would need counseling. Their families would need time to heal. But one mystery remained. Robert Parker had vanished that night and was never found. Sometimes Martinez wondered if he was still out there, watching from a distance. Or maybe he'd finally accepted that his desperate plan had failed and his daughters were better off with the families who raised them. The case was officially closed, but it raised questions about family, identity, and desperate love that would linger much longer. 3 months later, Madison and Taylor were living with their adoptive families again. They stayed in contact as sisters, but they were also learning to rebuild relationships with the parents who'd never stopped searching for them. The purple sleeping bag that started it all was stored in evidence, a reminder that sometimes the people we're searching for aren't lost at all. Sometimes they're just trying to find their way home to a family they never knew they had. But in this case, home turned out to be exactly where they'd started, with the people who loved them enough to never stop looking.